What does it take to move from a mindset of scarcity to one of abundance? And I mean abundance of anything. Join me and Kris Whitehead as we explore the power of conscious leadership, personal integrity, and how shifting from victim to visionary can change everything, not just for you, but for those you lead. Welcome to Rise to Lead, the podcast where heart-driven leaders come together to inspire and innovate. They will share actionable tips and insights that help you lead your team more successfully, advance your career or business as a leader, achieve greater impact, and experience deeper fulfillment. I'm your host, Regina Huber, guiding you through deep conversations about leadership that's rooted in service, freedom, and the desire to leave a positive mark on the world. Are you ready to create real change in your leadership, your career, your life? Join me for a complimentary Lead and Thrive session, a 60-minute one-on-one strategy session where we will discuss your specific needs and map out the next steps to lead yourself and others powerfully. Spots are limited, so don't wait. Visit transformyourperformance.com/Lead Thrive session to book your Lead and Thrive session today. Let's work together to make it happen. Welcome to the Rise to Lead podcast. I'm thrilled to introduce you to a super special guest, and I'm so jazzed to have you on, Kris Whitehead.
Regina, thank you very, very much for having me on your podcast. I appreciate it.
Kris, thank you so much for joining me here. I know this is going to be an awesome conversation. How do I know that? Because of the conversation we two had for your podcast not too long ago.
It's so amazing. This morning, so I own a couple businesses, and this morning I had to go to a client's home to collect a check for the next phase of what we're doing. And I ended up getting into maybe a 40-minute conversation with the homeowner, and it's really, really strange, but I think it'll probably tie in really well with your mission. He's a 38-year-old man. It's second marriage, blended home. He's responsible. They're doing, $100,000 remodel on their home, which is, it's a decent chunk of change for anybody, especially for somebody raising children that are 12, 14 years old. And I started talking about the pillars of life and how I used to focus so much on this one pillar of making money at the exclusion of everything else. And I started talking about not being very present in life. I mean, I'm not talking about just with my family. I focused on making money so much that, number one, I didn't make any money. Isn't that funny how it's like holding sand in your hands? It just dribbles out everywhere. But I also found me not dreaming high enough, not believing that I was worthy because I'm not getting this result in this one thing that I'm doing. I'm excluding all the blessings that are happening over here with my family, with my relationship with my higher power, with the fact that I'm fit and healthy, and that I laugh a lot. I'm having a good time, but I'm not focused on any of that stuff. Because I'm not succeeding in this one thing, I'm not willing to give myself permission to possibly succeed at a higher thing. And I said, what I learned, because I break everything down to singularities, Regina, and what I learned was, if I could raise my vibration, my frequency, that everything that is at that frequency meets me too. And my job is, once I accomplish whatever that is to never stop attempting to raise my frequency. And it led us to a smaller conversation where I asked him, what are you doing to maintain your frequency? And he didn't really have a whole lot to say. And so I told him about audiobooks that I listen to all the time. I told him about this one by Michael Singer that he really needs to listen to. And this is a real story about a real guy who became a multi-gazillionaire, got sued, lost it all. But the story of him actually acting like Forrest Gump. And if anybody knows Forrest Gump just went and did what Forrest Gump did without really a whole lot of purpose behind it other than knowing that he loves. And in the process of loving, he changed all of these people's lives. He was in amazing situations. And so I was sharing with this fellow that I'm here to do work on your home. You had been screwed over by another contractor before you met me, but I know that once you met me, that my job was to simply understand what it is that you want and then with integrity deliver on it. And at the same time, the singularity of me focusing on remaining only in my integrity to me. I don't have to worry then about remaining in integrity to you. And it was just this beautiful conversation with a client because I believe how you do anything is how you do everything. And I'm not going to be any different with him than I am with my wife, than with my children, than with you, your audience, my audience. It doesn't matter. And I would rather live my life today because I don't know if I'm going to be here tomorrow. I'd rather live my life today having real conversations with real people about things that can possibly elevate our experience instead of just going about the day-to-day life, wasting another 24 hours and not being aware of anything. So anyway,
Yeah,
just thought
so
I'd share that
that
with
was a
you.
beautiful introduction to who you are. So before I even could share anything about you, and that was so, so cool, right? And yes, I'm familiar with this story of Forrest Gump. I saw that movie a long time ago. Of course, now I'm also familiar with the actor who is not really so aligned with, whose behavior is not
Correct.
so aligned with, but it's a different story. Um, and yes, and you also touched on the understanding of abundance. First of all, abundance comes from within us because we create it all. And then there's always an abundance of many things, even those we don't necessarily desire, right?
Yes.
And it doesn't only refer to money, of course, but that for, that much I think everybody understands anyway. So, if you allow me, I'd just like to introduce a little bit more of who you are to our
Oh, sure.
audience before we dive into the rest of the conversation. But this was awesome. So,
Sure.
Kris Whitehead is the founder of Iconic Alliance, a whole life and business coaching program designed to help business owners and entrepreneurs excel in every area of their lives. Love that. In addition, he is the founder and CEO of New England Custom Remodeling, based in New Hampshire. Kris's extensive experience over the last 25 years of business ownership has also included growing an online coaching and development company to 8 figures, real estate investing, and several profitable online businesses. He is the best-selling author of Becoming Iconic: How to Make Today's Ceiling Tomorrow's Floor. Beautiful. Okay, so let's dive into it again. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
I think you're always ready. Okay, so in your bio, I somewhere also read his goal is to help you win. So whoever
Yes.
you work with, right? At
Yes.
business, at relationships, and life. Tell us about you and what drives you, what makes you want that, what makes you help other people win.
Um, so, I think all of us are born predisposed with certain personality traits. And one of my biggest, and I was told this, I don't remember it all, but I've always been a lover of people. I've
Mhm.
always, also, I went to 4-H camp when I was 5 years old, and mom said she was coming to pick me up. And all the kids are around a campfire, and everybody was telling stories. And it was me that was up telling this story about my St. Bernard dog, and I was making up a Halloween story. My birthday is October 30th. So, I'm putting it all around that stuff. And um, as I grew up, my parents got divorced when I was 2 years old. My dad moved away to Northern Virginia and became very successful in government and then privatized. But I didn't see him a lot. And I was raised primarily by my grandfather. And he'd made it to the ninth grade, but he had so much common sense. And he also would grow a garden and then he would give all of the food away to everybody in the neighborhood. And we had plenty as well. And I just had an example shown to me of someone who was good at being selfless. And we weren't rich by any stretch of the imagination. Um, but it was this idea that community matters. And as I started business, I was 24 years old when I began, had no business starting a business. I was ignorant, beyond ignorant. And I found myself slipping from it personal integrity because all of a sudden bills are due and I have to go make money. And if I can sell you, then I can get what I want. Forget that I don't know how to do what I just sold you. And what I found is what you just said about abundance coming from within. I had reversed that and thought that I had to take your abundance to give me abundance. And everything in my life, again, how you do anything is how you do everything. Well, my clients started turning into kind of takers. My
Mhm.
employees were takers. Everything that I saw was this big reflection of me. And I started in personal development listening to audiobooks at that time. And there were just little clues that were starting to be left that if I want my world to be a better place, I've got to make this man a better man. And slowly but surely, I started to let go of the ego. Um, and it's not really letting go. It's kind of like when you ask God to show you who you really are and you're waggling a finger at somebody, and all of a sudden, every time you do it, you see three waggling back at you. I just started to realize um, that unless I changed, my life was going to be miserable. And I was humbled over and over and over again.
Yes, that,
As I started to find success, and I'm not talking about financial success, I'm talking about
Mhm.
peace inside of me. Regina, all I want to do is give that to other people because it's the best gift I've ever been given. It doesn't matter whether I'm broke. It doesn't matter whether I lose everything. Including relationships. If it's just, it doesn't matter anymore. I have peace inside of me. And that's what I believe most people are searching for, even when they don't know they're searching for it. So I'm on a mission for anybody that wants to help, whether they're paying client or not. It's kind of like return the shopping cart, hold the door for someone, do the extra good deed, practice random acts of kindness and senseless acts of beauty for the sake of doing it, not for anything that I receive, because I'm abundantly receiving all of the time. And I believe that even after we pass away from this physical form, that's the energy that I will be able to maintain and heighten. So why not start now?
yes, exactly. And that abundance mindset was actually modeled by your family member, by your granddad,
Yes,
right?
sir. Yes, ma'am.
And you know what? I see that also with my mom. She has this garden. She grows potatoes. She grows, the veggies in the summer. She gives so much away, not just to her children who are nearby. I'm most of the time not there, but when I'm there, I get a piece of it too, a portion of it too. And but it's also her joy to do that, right? And
Mhm.
oftentimes, I even when I was there last time, I sort of felt a need to remind her to look, Mom, but keep some potatoes for you too for yourself, right? The winter is coming, and it's really important, especially in these times when we really don't know what's going to happen next. So. So anyway, it's just beautiful to see that, especially when people, don't own necessarily millions of dollars,
Sure.
they still have that sense of, yes, that giving abundance, right? And they don't expect anything in return for it. And I'm not saying we shouldn't receive too, because that is very important too. Some people only know to give and not to receive, and then they're missing out on the other part of the equation, which doesn't really work so well either.
We had talked about this on my podcast, the difference between balance and
Mhm.
harmony.
Mhm. Yeah.
And, you know, what I want, and you just mentioned it a moment ago, there needs to be harmony
Mhm.
with this abundance giving mindset. And that was the next step of being humbled is so I flip flop. I go from being a taker. So I was a giver, then I become a taker,
Mhm.
then I become a giver again. And I think, oh, I'm going to give out of the sack that I don't have anything in. And what I found happening was I was being pulled back into being a taker again.
Mm.
And what I relate it to is that oxygen mask metaphor. Like, I've got to put my mask on first before I can help anyone else. And I was an absolutely horrible receiver, Regina. Horrible. Oh, no, 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 no. I don't need anything. While I do, I need $100 so I can go pay this bill. Or, oh, yes, I do need a ride somewhere, but I'm going to walk 4 miles so that you don't know. And I wasn't willing to allow myself one thing, because this is the basis of it all for me. I wasn't willing to be vulnerable. And I think leaders today, and we're probably going to get into this, but I
Mhm.
think the number one quality of a leader to be effective is empathy. And that empathy comes from the willingness to be vulnerable and be real and authentic in the moment so that someone else is willing to trust you to allow you to lead them. And that was the biggest it's so easy to miss when you're not willing to receive from other people. Have you ever worked through that yourself?
Absolutely. And I had to learn it the hard way. You
Mm,
know, sometimes when we don't, I heard something the other day. I can't remember who said it now, but if you don't, if you do not ch- if you do not create the change you need, the change will come anyway. And this was also a type of change for me at some point when I really was was put into a situation where I had almost, well, we always have a choice, as you and I know, but but it almost seemed as if I didn't have a different choice at that point. And I had to ask for support. I had to ask for help. And I had to learn that. It was not an easy thing for me to learn because I had always been very independent and done everything for myself, or so it seemed, right? This was something that, yes, vulnerability was a piece of it for sure, but it was also that allowing myself to be supported and not always having the need to do it all myself. Maybe that's also because I was the oldest of five siblings, and and I was always like the one taking care of the other siblings automatically because I grew up on a farm and my dad had a job, a full-time job in addition to the farm. So my
wow.
parents were pretty busy people, right? Anyway, but this I think is actually the perfect segue into my next question about outdated leadership paradigms. What are some outdated leadership paradigms that come to your mind, Kris, that you believe that may need to be dismantled or replaced? And what could be a more conscious or evolved approach instead?
So, modality, one of the things that now that I'm 51,
Mhm.
gulp, but one of the modalities
Youngster.
one thank you. One of the modalities that I've seen that I really believe, especially men, are pressured with and then carry forward is this idea that I have to go at things hard. I have to do hard things. I have to sacrifice in order not to be the sacrifice. And this idea of being a megalomaniac and an ego driven person in order to become the top dog, the alpha, it'll get you somewhere. It'll definitely get you somewhere in a room by yourself eventually, most likely. And you won't be leading anyone but you. I really think that that modality, in particular, because I'm a guy and I'm able to witness it, I can't really empathize with women on that level. I don't experience corporate world or anything quite the same way. But when I listen to a lot of leaders speak and they're coming from this position of beat something into submission, um, it definitely gets the juices flowing for a younger testosterone driven audience, but I don't think it's sustainable long term.
Yes, it is. It sounds to me like external authority instead of internal authority, right?
Yeah.
And yes, and we want to be sustainably successful as leaders. Sometimes I read things like, how do you balance results like in numbers, right? And a heart-driven approach. And I have to laugh because why do I need to balance that?
Right.
It goes hand in hand for me, you know? Uh, if you want to be sustainably successful as a leader, then I'm assuming that you also want to gain fulfillment from this leadership. You want to not constantly be in stress mode. So what
Right.
does that mean? That you need to build a meaningful connection with the people you work with in my world. right? You need to build trust. How do you do that? Well, also, among other things, with a heart-centered approach, with a human-centered approach. There are many other components for sure as well, but it's not like you have to balance the tools because they are contradictory. That's just not true, right? What
I,
would Mhm.
as an example, the story that I told you about my client this morning,
Mhm.
if you would have told me 15 years ago that I would be at a client's home collecting a $50,000 check from them while talking to them about personal development and leadership and being the leader of your home, dreaming bigger. No, 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 those two things. And we're in New England, by the way. We're on the East Coast, which is hard driving people in a cold climate. So we're the hardest of the hard up here, supposedly. Yet I'm having this conversation with a mature young man, almost 40 years old, who, guess what? He was like, Kris, it's like you're in my head. I'm like, I know, bro. Because here's the cool thing. You can call higher power whatever you want to call it. You can call it consciousness, super consciousness, you can call it God, I'm not, whatever it is. But when you're tapped in, I don't have to worry about what I speak about. I just have to be vulnerable to who I am in that moment. And normally the conversation that we're having is always relatable. And if leaders could learn how to lean on that intuition, if they could really learn how to seat themselves in that place, what they'll find is they've been called to be that leader. And what they'll find is that the subject matter given to them is exactly happening at the right time. And I thought it was something that had to be produced instead of something that was just called being. And so I've had a lot of fun in my life. And I'm telling you, the more success I have, the more stress there is. So the more money I make, the more money I owe. Nobody ever told me that. I always thought, oh, I'm going to make $1 million and then everything's going to be fine. No, you make $1 million and you got to spend 1.5. That's how the game works. But I also saw me starting to wind up like a spring that was eventually going to snap. And I had to start asking myself, how do I sustain this? And everything that you and I talked about on my podcast, what we're talking about now, these are the little tips and tricks that I've used to live in a peaceful existence and not holding on too tightly to those numbers. Sometimes we win, sometimes we lose, sometimes it rains and you don't even get to play the game. It doesn't matter. What does matter is I am here now. I am fully seated. I am paying attention to Regina. I am having a conversation with you. And that builds no like trust. When we take the time to give someone else the opportunity to be with us, I truly believe that they reciprocate that and they appreciate that. And the coolest thing is the ones that don't, they get rid of you pretty quickly anyway. It makes them way too uncomfortable. And I'm fine with that part as well because we're not here to lead everyone. There's 8 billion people in the world, you know?
Absolutely. Yes. And you might have read my mind because the next question was going to be about intuition. Actually, you already touched on it.
Okay.
So, what role does, in your opinion or in your experience, what role does intuition play in innovative leadership, in contemporary trailblazing leadership, whatever you want to call it, but in the leadership you and I want to see? Let's just call
So,
it
so
that.
yeah, and here's the cool thing. My opinion's like everything else. Take what you like, leave the rest. I know
Exactly.
I am not an engineer. Okay.
Mhm.
I have lots of people that work for me that are engineers. I've seen leaders that are engineers that are great at what they do, and they are by the book and they are bink, 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 and that's great. I'm a visionary. I'm also an integrator, which means I can go do the work, but truly I'm a visionary. And I believe that a visionary leader who is creating something, like creativity and intuition are like foundational blocks of one another. I don't think you can have one without the other. And this idea of having a feeling in your gut, not necessarily always in your head. We think it's coming from our head, but really, I think intuition comes from this smarter brain inside of our stomach. You'll have a feeling, fight or flight. You'll have a feeling of go do this or don't do this. And what I've often heard is that is a fleeting thought. And if you don't take action on that, it'll be replaced by something else. So when I'm in a dynamic situation with hundreds of people or hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars, and I've never done it before and I don't know what to do, Virginia, the first thing I do is lean on my intuition. I, what was that old hippie saying, like tune in, tap out, or whatever it was? Like, what I do is I turn this off and I literally, hi, I'm Kris. And whatever comes up is what comes up. And whether it's right or whether it's wrong, I learn from it. And the coolest part that I've experienced in my life, I've had the opportunity to build 8-figure companies. I've had the opportunity to lose it all and build it again. I built a remodeling company 3 times. So it's not like, oh, I've just had success after success. But what I've never found is I'm not dead yet and I still have an opportunity to grow. And that intuition is what guides me who to communicate with, what subject matters are important. Intuition that we had here is like, oh, that's my next question. Is cool. When you're tapped into that kind of stuff, you find yourself resonating with your life. Because that's really all that there is of you just being. There is an argument to say, and I know this is going to sound super woo-woo to some people. What if you don't exist and you're just an extension of my mind?
Yeah,
What if
absolutely.
I'm the only thing that actually exists because my perception of reality is all that there truly is for me?
Yes, and
And
what
it
if you're not even a thing? You know?
now we're going down the rabbit hole to talk about that. I want to hear about that.
Yeah, totally. So there's so many. I actually made a few notes here because there's so many things that we could touch on in what you just said. So one thing is, of course, yes. What if we are not a thing, right? What if it's just consciousness? Because actually, as we now know, even science has caught up on that. Everything is energy and consciousness. So what if you are the creator of your universe and I'm the creator of my universe? As you said, what you if you just reflect something out. And you will actually love a future guest that I will have on. And I have to say it again because I think I mentioned him on your podcast as well. Brian Ridgway talks a lot about that, right? And so here's the thing. There might be different imaginations or different concepts by different people of what that actually looks like, and everybody has a right to have their own to have their own concept about it. But I think it's really, really important to think about it, right? Even though you might not agree with my understanding of the world, well, think about it. Give yourself the opportunity. You also said you had the opportunity to rebuild. And I love that because you could have seen it as something completely different. You could have said you were forced to rebuild, which gives it a completely different connotation.
Sure.
Okay. So yeah, so I love this conversation because, when we actually play with this idea that we create our reality and all of it, then we can take responsibility. And I have been talking about this for a long time. And again, Brian does it in his own way, in a really great way. Uh, and so that's also why I have been thinking about it even beyond the previous, beyond my previous way of thinking lately. And that's also why I love to have these conversations with you because you are totally open to them, and you know, we can go down that rabbit hole together.
When I was in college, um, Jehovah's Witnesses, certain faith, if people don't know, would
Hmm.
come and knock on the door,
Yeah.
right? Now I'm 19 years old. The Most people see 2 people dressed up in, a white shirt and black top and slacks and is like, no, you're not coming in my home. You're trying to sell me something. I sat down with them and had a 3-hour conversation. Um, there was a time in our lives where being homosexual was not acceptable. And if you were, it's fine. You're just not allowed to talk about it. Well, I worked in restaurants for a while. I'm not. But you know what? I started hanging around some of my friends that were gay
Hmm.
and just having conversations with them. I was raised my stepmom and my dad is a conservative, or was. My stepmom was a school teacher, so she was very liberal. And my dad, I saw my dad allow my stepmom to have her way of looking at things without correcting her. And even though on the background, I knew that he thought different. And just in that observance, I saw how harmony could take place. They've been married almost 40 years now. And I wanted to live in a world where I could gain insight somewhat, not necessarily empathy, but at least a little bit of sympathy for the situation that person is in. And Regina, all I've learned from it, all I've learned from it is that it makes me more at peace with who I am because I don't have stones that are unturned. You know, what it was leading me to think about when you were talking about it was ego is not a bad thing.
No, it's not.
Ego is there for your survival. That's the primary reason that we have that fight or flight instinct.
Hmm.
But ego can also become too strong of a muscle. And what I've experienced by being open to situations, by seeing things as opportunities, by seeing that life is happening for me instead of to me. And yes, I've had to work through that, humbled again by it. But as I've done that, it's allowed me to become a better leader. That's what I truly believe leaders can do. They're people that have had experiences just like you, and you're talking to me about it, Sally. Yes, I did that same thing. I made a mistake. Guess what? Here's what I did. Maybe it'll help you get out of that situation. So as a leader, I don't want to be someone that's authoritarian that do what I say to do. I want to be someone that has been there, done that, and can help you. And by God, if I can't at least tell you that I'm not the guy to help you in that situation, the only way that I can do that is by having open conversations with people and going, well, let me noodle on that for a little while. Maybe it's not meant on the surface level that she's saying it. Maybe what Regina's really trying to do is to get me to come up with my own conclusions instead of telling me, because what real leaders do is they help create other leaders.
Hmm.
That's what I truly believe. And that's what makes our country great. It's what makes our world great. And at the end of the day, it's what makes this whole simulation that we're living in great, because we can raise that frequency and vibration for everyone around the world if we truly live it.
It's also about being present with other people. You know,
Yes, ma'am.
when we are really present with what they, not just what they have to say, but who they are. And then we can understand a bit better where they're coming from. That's also one of the reasons why I ask people to share at least a tiny piece of their story at the beginning of the podcast, because I think it's interesting to know where you're coming from so
Yeah.
that I can then better understand what you're going to share with me, right? And you also talked about intuition, and I think, you know, in it being in the gut. So of course we could also like be very nitty gritty and talk about intuition and instinct and what's the difference and whatnot. I think that's not really the purpose here, but I also believe that it's in our hearts. Yeah,
Yes.
so it might also
Yes.
feel different for different people. And we need to
Okay.
be open to that possibility of where can we access our intuition most easily. For some people, it's in the third eye, you know, whatever it is for you, where you believe you can access it most easily, well, try it out and experiment.
What was your experience coming into your intuition? What my experience for most ladies is that they're more willing to receive that earlier than men.
Hmm.
But what's your story of coming into your intuition? Because you've done a lot of really amazing things. And I mean, you said it, you came from a really hardworking farm family. Um, and you've gone very far from that, have you not?
I've gone very far away because I was always wanting to explore. And actually, my dad had that adventurous spirit too. And the entire lineage of my dad, they just couldn't always, you know, there was actually one family member who did it, who actually traveled up the Nile from south to north and eventually got killed in Egypt. It's a story that I only discovered a few years ago because
Wow.
there was a documentary about that person. Extremely adventurous. I mean, much more than I in different ways. But you know, So it's a little bit in my blood, I would say. Although I was also the shyest kid in town, so I had to move through that. Now, and that intuition was leading me. There was also a point in my life, though, Kris, where I totally doubted my intuition, and that was when I made some experiences where I just had not listened to it enough. And then so then I started doubting my intuition as a result of that, and had to regain the ability to hear it. And because sometimes people
What
ask,
did what
"Oh,
did you do? What did you do? What did you do to regain it? I'm curious what tools you used.
well, it did require a little bit of time. First of all, I had to move into out of victim mode, which I was in at that time, I admit, into a more self-empowering mindset again. And then, of course, I had studied several different holistic modalities, which helped me
Hmm.
get into that. So I started understanding my energy more. I started understanding my subconscious programming and conditioning more, and that was sort of the rational basis for that allowed me to access my intuition more readily again. And I have to say, with other people, I actually did not doubt it as much in terms of the work I'm doing. Like as a coach, I have never had any problems getting people pretty quickly.
Yeah.
And that's also interesting, right? But yeah, so do you have any tips for that, or do you have any specific modalities?
Um, well, I've kind of been speaking about them because it's the same thing, and that's why I
Hmm.
asked you. Like, my experience is very similar to your experience. Number one,
Hmm.
I recognized that I wasn't getting the results that I wanted, no matter how hard I worked, and that I wasn't going to strategize my way through it. It just there were as you go down that particular rabbit hole, there are 14 more rabbit holes that have 14 that have 14 that have 14. It's like, I can't control this thing. And then I realized the thing that was out of control was me. And the reason I was out of control is because I was out of touch with me. And the reason I was out of touch with me is because I was in victim mode and everything was happening to me. So that was the first realization. The second one is that I actually don't have much control over anybody or any other situation in life. The only thing I actually have control over are my own thoughts and my own actions. And then from there, I realized how out of control those things were, that I was actually just acting on impulse, not instinct, but impulse.
Hmm.
And that's when I was willing to self discipline a little bit. I was willing to deny me some things so that something else could grow in its place. And it's the
Okay.
same thing you're saying. And then as I started leaning into intuition, the part that was so hard for me is that it was 90% of the time counterintuitive to what made common sense in the situation to do to begin with. It's like, hey, this isn't working. Yes, you have to move 1,000 miles away. How is that going to fix anything? But then I did it. Oh, 24 years old, 23-ish. I'm in corporate America. I've gone to college so that I can do this thing. This isn't for me. This isn't for me. Yeah, but dude, you're gonna like when I became an entrepreneur, it was not sexy and cool to be an entrepreneur. You were supposed to go to college, supposed to go work, supposed to get the golden parachute and the all the stuff. But inside of me, I was like, this is not a life. I would rather be a beggar than do what I'm doing. So I lean into intuition, and it's scary sometimes. But I've had so many experiences now that when I lean in, that life unfolds for me and that I just simply walk into it. And so now I have more peace, I have more joy, I have more energy to focus outward and not so much on my own survival. So for me, it first, and I think you said this, it had to go through my intellectual faculty, and I had to agree that it was worthy to give it a try. And then guess what? I had to actually jump off the diving board into the water. That was the space that if I spent too much time in, I don't have any regrets, but that was the space that I try to help other people go from. Now, this is a potential modality for you, don't you? Yes, you got to jump. I don't want to jump. So I go, there you go.
Right, exactly. And we all have it.
Yes,
every single
everybody.
person has intuition. It's not like, oh, I'm so intuitive. No, you are also so intuitive. And we just are educated out of it at an early age, or most of us, not all of us, but most of
Yes,
us. And we are told to be highly analytical, highly rational, highly, oh, this is a fact, that's a fact, only to find out later in life that we were told so many lies actually as facts. And then now I have to laugh about it almost. But that's what we're told in school. Just don't think, don't feel, don't well, do think, but not really for yourself,
right.
and just repeat facts and whatnot. And so we a lot of us really, if we want to get somewhere with this, we gotta invest some energy into it and relearn it,
Mhm.
right?
And I for so many years, um, so 2004,
Hmm.
I was listening to MP3s that you could get from the library. So you would literally go and get this little box and you would plug your earphones into it, put it in your pocket. So we were doing work outside, painting homes, doing whatever. I got my employees MP3s and I started listening. So we were painting this Shakespearean theater in Stanton, Virginia, which was fun, by the way. It was like 14 different colors. It was like gilding the lily. It was amazing. Um, and I'm listening to Earl Nightingale talk about this thing called a mastermind group.
Mm.
Now I'm 30-ish years old, you know, and I'm in Stanton, Virginia, which you don't know, it's a fairly rural place. And he's talking about getting with people at your level and above. I don't know any people at my level or above. All of my clients are 60 because that's all that can afford me. I can't be best friends with my employees because that doesn't work out very well. And if anybody ever wants to have a private conversation about that, I'm happy to. How am I going to, like, there was no internet. What am I going to put an ad in the newspaper? But anybody making $1 million or more, I'm not, and I really would like you to come hang out with me so I could learn how to do what you're doing. Like, I didn't know how to, but by listening to this thing started happening in my subconscious, my unconscious mind. I ended up moving 1,000 miles away. I end up just so happening that the internet's on and this guy's running a mastermind, and I end up paying him $30,000. The next thing you know, I'm hanging out with like-minded people. 2 years later, my lifestyle goes from middle to super high level. 2 years later, I go right back down here and the opportunity to build it yet again. If I'd have looked at any of that logically, Regina, I would still be in Virginia twiddling my thumbs going, oh, well, because it doesn't make any sense how I got here.
Mm.
But in hindsight, always being 2020, I can go, man, what a cool life. What a fun time. Where are you right now? Are you in France or what? Are you in America? What country are you? You're in
Yeah,
France right
I'm
now.
in France right now. I'm not
Look at
always
this.
here, but I'm in France right now.
We're masterminding right now. Other
Right.
people are just voyeurs listening to your show, and we're
Hmm.
having a little conversation because who knows what you say or I say might create a spark that we take with us. And that's what that flame's all about. We take with us, and then I go have a conversation with somebody else. And my good friend Regina said this thing. Oh my gosh. And then we just keep moving that on down the road. If there was one thing that I didn't do fast enough was evolve. I wasn't willing to take the pain of change, but I promise you, the pain of regret is way, way, way steeper of a price. And that's when I really started going, hey, what if this isn't happening to me? What if this is not fate, but what if I have a destiny? What if I get to write my own story? And I know that sounds gutsy to some people, but then I start hanging around people like you that have written their own story, and I go, what if we get to help each other write our own stories? And it's actually all of our stories collectively. It's the most beautiful thing I've ever been a part of. And I don't think I'll ever stop. I don't think I can at this point stop. Once you see it a certain way, you can't go back and see it the other way. It's like the blue or the red pill. You just take it and it's like, that's your reality now.
Right. Yes, and aren't we writing our own stories anyway? We just don't do it always consciously. So we write stories that we don't want to really live, right? And that's also why I think really doing it consciously, that's the difference. Just like leadership. So I'm curious, Kris, what's your
Mhm.
definition of conscious leadership?
Conscious leadership to me is being aware of what your role is. The leader is not
Mhm,
the most important. So people have, I think a lot of people mistake things.
mhm,
We reward sports players because they're the best at something.
mhm,
And we take that, we reward people that make a lot of money and say they must be amazing husbands or wives. They must be amazing parents. They must be amazing. No, they just have a lot of money. It doesn't mean they're amazing anything. And the same thing with leaders. Just because someone is the owner of something or the leader of something doesn't make them any better or worse than anybody else. So, conscious leadership, in my opinion, is being aware of what your role is inside of whatever loosely quoted organization you're talking about and fulfilling your purpose.
mhm.
And that requires, and being a leader because of that role requires sometimes more skills than other um, jobs or roles inside of that organization. But you're taking it on because that's what's been given to you is gifts and talents that you can develop. And so the biggest thing for me, this is just me, the
Mhm.
biggest thing for conscious leadership is being aware that you're here to serve everyone else in your organization. Leaders eat last. And that's very okay in my book because leaders know that when they have to, they will eat because they always have.
Yes, absolutely. I have somebody in mind, that another podcast host, that whose podcast I wanna I wanna introduce you to already.
I love to talk to people.
Yes, absolutely. Kris, we've been talking for a while, and I know you and I, we can talk forever. Um, why don't we I think this is really beautiful, sort of an ending to this conversation, what you just said. Unless, of course, you want to add something that is on your heart that you absolutely want to share with us.
The only thing that I want to share is, I got to meet you on my podcast. And what I've noticed in our energy on this podcast is we've gotten to know each other even better, just even in the tonality that we're using in communication. And I just want to say thank you for being my friend. Thank you for hosting your podcast. Thank you for what you do for people and humanity. And I would love to have another conversation with you whenever it serves you best. Um, and I really enjoyed our conversation today. Thank you for having me on.
Let's do it. I am saying the same. This has been wonderful. Thank you so much for being on, for inspiring us all. Where can people find your podcast and your book, of course, and you?
So I'm on all the major platforms for the podcast. It's called Build an Iconic Life.
Mhm.
You can check out iconicalliance.com. That's a way to contact me. And then I'm on all the major social medias, but probably the easiest one is, at least the one that I check the DMs sometimes, is the Kris Whitehead, Kris Whitehead, on Facebook. Just send me a DM or like one of my posts and leave a comment in it because I don't always look in the spam if we're not friends. And I'm happy to have a conversation with anyone. If I can help them out, I will.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Thank you again for being on with us today. Thanks to everyone listening, and I'll catch you next time.
See you, everybody.
Thank you for tuning in to Rise to Lead. Keep shining your light, standing up for what's right, and inspiring others to step into their brilliance. If you liked this episode, please give it a 5-star rating and subscribe to the Rise to Lead podcast on your preferred podcast app. Until next time, it's Regina Huber, and in the meantime, Remember to rise to lead.